How a Romance Novel Saved the Galaxy by Ariana Derrote. Chapter 57. Plo Koon 6, Dooku 6. The Beskar embedded in the ground of Concordia was proving as troublesome as Plo and Faye had expected. They'd been able to rule out some areas which had little Beskar content, such as the most forested regions, but the majority of the moon's crust had Beskar-saturated ore, which muffled force detection. Beskar mines, which had been depleted of ore, also couldn't withstand their combined telepathy, though Plo and Faye had to be in closer than expected due to trace amounts of Beskar left in the walls of the depleted mines. Unfortunately, this still left hundreds of non-depleted mines across Concordia, which needed to be excluded from their search for Deathwatch and the stolen children. After meeting the current head of Clan Vizsla, who ran about half of the active mines on the planet, he and Faye had mutually decided not to rule out the active Vizsla mines. It was very obvious that the head of Clan Vizsla was merely a figurehead for Tor Vizsla, leader of Deathwatch. If he had ordered them to conceal the Deathwatch base, then they couldn't trust anything the clan head told them. The true Mandalorians had been systematically searching the abandoned and non-Vizsla mines since they returned from Galedran, so there were less mines to search each day, but it was still a daunting number to get through under a time limit, which was now more urgent knowing that young Obi-Wan was in Deathwatch's hands. So far, Faye had yet to sense him through their bond. So they turned to a source the true Mandalorians had been unable to get to cooperate: the stubborn isolationist farmers of Concordia. The farmers occupied fertile valleys surrounded by steep slopes populated by some sort of pine trees. Carefully hidden blaster turrets defended the only entrance to the valley they chose to approach. Plo idly wondered what defenses they had for aerial assault, while he and Faye politely waited at the edge of the valley. The blaster from the turret was trained on them by a Mandalorian teenager whose anxiety and excitement in the Force suggested they hadn't ever experienced anything like this during a watch before. Eventually, a group of farmers made their way to where they were waiting. Most only wore pieces of armor. Vambraces or greaves were most common. The people wearing them were a wide range of humanoids, often with some sign of non-human ancestry. Many of them seemed to have pointed chins and high foreheads, suggesting they still bore the blood of the original Mandalorians, the Tongs. They were also heavily armed with either old, well-cared-for blaster rifles or various pieces of farming equipment.
"Greetings,"
said Plo, stepping forward.
"I'm Jedi Master Plo Koon, and this is Master Faye. We're trying to find out where Deathwatch is located in order to save the children they've been abducting. If you know where they are, we would be grateful for the assistance."
One of the bigger Mandalorians scoffed.
"Deathwatch doesn't bother us here. They know better."
There was a few appreciative cheers at the statement. "You have an agreement with them to not take your children?" asked Faye sharply. An elderly human shook their head and spoke with accented standard.
"We have fought off any Deathwatch who bother us, just as we have fought off any others who try for hundreds of years. You will be next, Jedi."
Deathwatch are stealing children and torturing them. We need to know their location before they are permanently harmed," said Plo. "If you have any idea where Deathwatch are refusing to tell us, makes you not a Mandalorian."
The insult caused an uproar amongst the gathered farmers. One of them, a tall humanoid with gray-greenish skin, stood up and ran at Plo, attempting to tackle him. Plo sidestepped. He fleetingly thought of drawing his lightsaber, but decided not to escalate. Instead, he dodged the being's strong but slow blows. The farmer had on more armor than most of them. It covered their chest, arms, and shins. Their thighs and elbows were the only uncovered areas. The front and outside of the thigh on humanoids were normally protected by muscle, but the inside, on the being's next punch, he moved to the side, letting it pass by his head, and kicked out with one precise boot dip to a spot on the inner part of the Mandalorian's thigh. They collapsed with a yelp of pain. "Fighting doesn't negate the fact that you are acting as Darmanda at the moment," declared Faye, her voice ringing out in a way that somehow silenced all the protests and cries. "If you don't want to be considered Darmanda by your fellow Mandalorians, help us find the children!" Some of the farmers looked stunned, while others looked excited. The older-looking human who had spoken before stepped forward. Their armor was scratched and dented in many places, and they walked with a pronounced limp.
"I'm Clanid Corvus of Clan Tozama. We will gather everyone together so we can pool our recent knowledge of Deathwatch's movements. In the meantime, join us in the main hall. We can offer you refreshments, food, read the rock."
Behind him, Faye choked off a laugh. The word was familiar. Wasn't that the Mandalorian for partner? Corvus fixed their gaze behind Plo and Faye.
Both of you.
The Force prodded him awake. When the incoming comm chimed, Jan hit the correct button. He had a sense of who would be calling at this time.
See,
he said, then frowned when he saw the state his friend was in. His hair was undone, his robes in disarray.
Did you have a vision?
Sifo-Dyas laughed raggedly. I thought without the Force a bit lightning, I could come to Jedi without consequences. It really has been fascinating. He trailed off, eyes unfocused. It made Jan fleetingly wish for the days when Sifo-Dyas had been quite so open to the unifying side of the Force. His Force visions could be truly debilitating.
What is it you saw, my friend?
He asked. Sifo-Dyas didn't seem to hear him.
Alas, there is so much Kyber here. The statues have been speaking to me.
The Temple of Kyber had statues of ancient Force users carved out of crystal, lining its tunnels.
Surely they keep their ancient texts far from the underground temple complex.
Does distance matter to the Force?
Asked Sifo-Dyas, a weary look in his eyes. It was a reference to a debate they'd had as initiates. If size and distance mattered not, as Yoda put it, why did it actually seem to matter to Jedi in practice? They'd never come to a satisfactory answer.
Perhaps it's time you took your leave,
Jan suggested. His friend nodded.
I will. How was the Mandalorian temple?
Had Jocasta told him, or had he seen it in a vision?
Vizsla seems to have been keeping future Jedi in mind when he built it.
When he had realized there would be a delay to gather the Mandalorian forces and for the council members to arrive, Jan had given in to his curiosity and headed back to the temple. It was much larger than it looked from the front. He had also, after much consideration, brought Vizsla's holocron back with him for safekeeping.
Does Jocasta... Wait, she isn't there yet, is she?
Sifo looked uncertain.
I wouldn't be surprised if she's on her way.
She'd probably commandeered a ship and headed straight for Tade Vizsla's holocron.
You called for a reason, see?
Yes. I saw fragments of a battle between Mandalorians in grey and blue armor and other Mandalorians. Sometimes there were lightsabers. One was black. Tell the Mandalore to bring us Tonfa.
I shall.
There were numbers painted haphazardly on walls of ore. 29, 35, 37. Maybe mining tunnel labels? You need to keep them in mind.
Considering the trouble they were having pinpointing the Death Watch base on Concordia, those numbers might indeed be useful.
I will do so. Is there anything else?
Sifo-Dyas grimaced. Nothing concrete. It's all shifting.
Very well.
Jan looked over his friend.
Since I'm not there to do it for you, please make yourself a cup of calming tea and book a transport away from Jedha as soon as possible.
A small smile appeared on his friend's face.
You said please do. I must truly look a fright.
You look awful,
said Jan.
Yes, I know. Do you think I should go back to the temple? Or maybe I should go to Mandalore?
Be prepared for lots of Mandalorian attention if you come here.
Jan warned. He doubted that Sifo's visions and their effects would put them off.
Said
Sifo-Dyas, his eyes once again unfocused.
Go make some tea,
Jan ordered.
So bossy,
Sifo-Dyas muttered.
I'm going.
At least he remembered to turn off his comm before he went. Nod had put some medicine on the few cuts Kitty had. There was nothing he could do for the hand-shaped bruises on her arms. He scanned the area carefully one more time before taking off his borrowed armor piece by piece. The moment he was down to his body sleeve, Kiri was huddled in his arms, murmuring something in Ryle that he didn't understand.
Odesi,
Kirika, he said, then realized he was also speaking in a language he didn't understand.
Calm yourself, little one. He'll come back to us.
He was glad he kept the borrowed helmet on so she couldn't see the doubt on his face.